Montana Territory, September 1883. The wind carried the scent of pine and dust as the sun dipped low over the Bitterroot Mountains, casting long shadows across the valley. Behind a weathered white church abandoned by time, a woman collapsed, her dress torn, her arms scraped, and her breath shallow. She hit the dirt hard, her fingers trembling as they grasped at nothing. Zadie Monroe had run out of road. Her boots, once laced tight, flapped loose around her ankles, one missing entirely. Blood streaked her temple. Her chest rose and fell in quick, uneven gasps. She had not eaten in 2 days. She had not slept in 3. But she had made it. Somehow, she had made it to the edge of Hamilton, Montana, and the old church that had once held her mother's funeral. She curled on her side and whispered, "Just let me rest." And then the world went black. Levi Vance had not slept since the last calf dropped 4 nights ago. His ranch sat west of the river, where the ground was dry and the winter came early. He had lost 2 heifers to infection, and his eldest horse had gone lame. Nights drifted one into the next, his eyes red-rimmed, his hands calloused and raw. He rode into town that evening, saddle creaking beneath him, to pick up a shipment of seed from the postmaster. He never meant to stop by the church. But something, maybe the way the wind shifted, or maybe the way his chest ached like it used to when he was a boy, pulled his gaze toward the old steeple. That was when he saw her. A woman, half covered in dirt and pine needles, lay crumpled like a broken doll behind the church. Levi swung down from his horse fast. His boots hit the ground and he ran to her. "Miss?" he said, kneeling beside her. "Hey, can you hear me?" She did not move. He touched her shoulder and felt faint warmth. Alive, but barely. Her lips were cracked. Her hair, dark and tangled, clung to her forehead. "Help," she whispered, too faint to rise. "Please." "I got you," Levi said, lifting her gently. He wrapped her in his coat. "You were going to be all right." She woke hours later in his home, eyes fluttering open to the sound of a fire crackling and a kettle whistling. The cabin was small but clean. The bed beneath her was warm. She blinked toward the figure crouched beside the stove. "You brought me here," she said. Her voice was rasped and dry. Levi turned, surprised she was awake. "You were out cold. I thought you might not make it." "Where am I?" "My ranch. About 3 miles west of Hamilton. I am Levi Vance." She stared at him like she was trying to make sense of the world again. "Zadie Monroe." He stood and brought her a cup of water. "Drink slow. You were real dehydrated." She took it with weak hands. Her brows pinched as she drank. "Thank you." He gave a small nod, then pulled a stool beside the bed. "You are safe now," he said. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Zadie looked away. Her fingers tightened around the tin cup. "I had to run," she said after a pause. "My uncle. He was supposed to care for me after my father passed. But he sold off what little was left of our land and tried to marry me off to a man twice my age. When I refused, he beat me. Took everything. I left 2 nights ago. Been walking ever since." Levi's jaw clenched. "No one should have to go through that." "I did not know where else to go," she whispered. "But I remembered this place. My mother was buried behind the church." Levi's voice softened. "I am sorry." Zadie blinked hard. "I did not come looking for anyone. Just wanted to see her grave. Just wanted to sit beside her one more time. You ended up nearly dying." "Maybe that was all right," she said, but her voice trembled. Levi reached out, slow and careful, and set his hand over hers. "No, it is not all right. You are here now, and I will make sure you stay safe." Her eyes met his, then green and tired, but strong underneath it all. She did not pull her hand away. 2 days passed. Zadie stayed in the guest room, eating what little she could, sleeping better than she had in weeks. Levi kept to his chores but always came back with something in his hands: fresh eggs, a slice of cornbread, a worn book from town. "You were not sleeping," she said one night when she found him sitting on the porch staring out over the hills. He gave a tired smile. "Never do." "Why?" Levi looked down at his hands. "My wife passed 5 years ago. Fever took her before winter. We did not have children. Just the land. After she died, I kept working. Every day. Never stopped. Never let myself feel it." Zadie sat beside him, her blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. And now, he glanced at her. Now I do not know how to stop. She reached over and touched his hand. This time he held on. By the end of the week, Zadie was stronger. She wore one of Levi's shirts tied at the waist, her bruises fading. She helped him mend a fence post, her hands blistered but steady. You do not have to stay, he said, watching her work. I know, she said, and kept hammering. That night she cooked for him. Nothing fancy, just beans and biscuits, but he swore it was the best thing he had eaten in years. They sat close by the fire, the silence between them easy now. You saved my life, she said softly. You gave me something to wake up for, he said back. She leaned her head to his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her gently. Neither of them moved for a long time. Later, as the moon climbed high and soft wind pressed against the windows, Zadie stood barefoot on the floorboards and turned to him. I think I could love you, she said, voice shaking. Levi stepped toward her. I already do. And when he kissed her, it was not rushed. It was steady. True. They did not speak for a long while after that. They just held each other, both finally still, finally home. The first frost came lightly, lining the fence rails in silver and turning the pasture grasses brittle at their tips. Levi rose early, as he always did, but for the first time in years he lingered a moment longer than necessary beside the wood stove, watching Zadie sleep in the narrow bed across the room. Her breath was soft and even, her face turned toward the wall, hair tucked behind one ear. The lines of pain she'd carried when she arrived had eased, though they hadn't vanished. He stepped outside into the cold and saddled his mare without waking her. A light snow would come soon, and the hay needed stacking tighter in the barn rafters. He worked into mid-morning, pitching bales alongside the hired boy from 2 ranches over, until the sweat on his back steamed in the chill air. When he returned, Zadie was at the table, sleeves rolled, peeling apples into a tin bowl. She glanced up once, then kept peeling. These came from the Miller place, she said. I traded for them this morning. The woman there, she's got a daughter just about grown. Said she remembered when your wife passed. Brought up a pie she'd baked you once. Levi set his gloves on the counter. You walked to the Miller place on your own? I didn't think you'd mind. I borrowed your second coat. I don't mind, he said. Just didn't expect you'd go that far. I needed the walk. She paused, setting another curl of redskin aside. And I wanted to talk to someone who knew her. I thought maybe I ought to understand the kind of woman you chose. He pulled out the chair across from her. You don't have to measure yourself against anyone. I'm not, but I'm here. In her home, using her spoons, wearing your shirt. I wanted to be sure I wasn't stepping where I shouldn't. Levi reached across and closed his hand over her wrist. You're not taking anyone's place, Zadie. You're making your own. She let out a breath, slow and quiet. That's what the Miller woman said too. Later that afternoon, they rode out together. She sat straight in the saddle, though her seat was still uncertain. Levi kept close, watching the way she gripped the reins, how she leaned too far into turns. They didn't speak much, but the silence between them had changed. It held a steadiness now, like a beam set firm in the ground. At the south edge of the property, he showed her the place where he meant to build the second barn, just a timber frame for now, something to store winter feed and tack. You ever done any carpentry? He asked, testing her comfort with the idea. I mended chicken coops growing up. Built a shelf once, crooked as a dog's hind leg. He chuckled. That's a start. They rode on. Overhead, geese flew low, their calls echoing across the valley. Zadie tilted her head up, following the line of them, her expression unreadable. My father used to say they never got lost, she said, that they remembered every bend of land, every river mouth, no matter how far they flew. Maybe they do, Levi said, or maybe they just trust each other enough to keep going. That night the wind picked up. Levi added extra wood to the stove, and Zadie laid out the quilt she'd been stitching from scraps. It wasn't even halfway done, but she spread it over the bed anyway. "I think I'd like to stay through winter," she said, smoothing the corner. He paused in the doorway. "You sure?" "I am." He walked to her, slow. "If you stay, it's not just a rest. There'll be work and there'll be days it's so cold you can't feel your fingers. You'll be part of this place. That means the hard parts too." She looked up at him. "That's what I want. Not to be kept or pitted. I want to make something with my own hands. Something that lasts." Levi reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Then we'll build it together." She nodded once and he kissed her forehead, soft and sure, like laying claim to something precious. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Inside, they stood close in the dim light, two people who hadn't asked for each other, but who now couldn't imagine bearing another season alone. A week after Zadie decided to stay, a cold rain came in low from the west, soaking the earth and turning the pastures into thick, boot-sucking muck. Levi hitched the horses under the lean-to, then checked the north fence line while Zadie stayed behind to oil the hinges on the barn doors. They'd started groaning against the wind, and she didn't like the sound of things falling apart. When Levi returned, he found her on a stool beneath the eaves, sleeves rolled to her elbows, one hand steadying the tin can of oil, the other working the brush into the rusted joints. Her hair was pinned back with a scrap of leather cord, and her boots were caked in mud. "You didn't need to do that in the rain." She didn't stop her work. "I'm not made of sugar." He leaned against the doorway, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "You're not easy to read, you know that? I've heard. Not careful. Not timid. But you've got walls thicker than this barn." She looked up at him then, the brush stilled in her hand. "You don't get to where I've been without learning how to keep things out." Levi nodded once. "You ever let anything in?" She set the brush down and wiped her hands on her skirt. "Not until now." They stood like that, the sound of rain between them, until she stepped down and walked past him into the barn. He followed. Inside, the air smelled of wet hay and horses. She pulled a wool blanket from the shelf and began spreading it over the draft horse's stall gate. Her movements quiet and sure. "I used to dream of places like this," she said. "Not the land or the house. Just this, the stillness. The sound of something breathing next to you that won't leave come morning." Levi crossed the space, boots soft on the packed earth. "You've got it now." She turned. "Do I?" "Only if you want it." Her eyes searched his. "I want more than just shelter. I want to build something with someone who won't run when it gets cold. You said we'd build it together. I need to know you meant that." He reached for her hand, rough palm against her calloused one. "I've never said anything I didn't mean." She held onto his hand longer than she ever had before, then set her forehead lightly against his chest. That night, Zadie unpacked the bundle she'd kept tied in a flour sack since leaving her uncle's house. Inside were 3 items: a water-stained letter from her father, a bent hair comb her mother once used, and a small wooden cross with the name Zadie Monroe carved faintly into it. She placed the cross on the mantel without a word. Levi noticed, but didn't ask. Instead, he handed her a folded piece of linen he'd found in the back of his wife's old chest. "Thought you could use it for your quilt." She unfolded it. This was hers. She never got around to sewing it. Zadie traced the edge. "Then I will." In the days that followed, she started rising earlier. They worked side by side, repairing the chicken coop, felling a dead tree near the well, and marking where the new barn posts would stand once the ground thawed. One morning, Levi found her kneeling in the garden row, turning soil with her bare hands. "We won't get a harvest this late." "I know," she said, "but I needed to feel something growing." By mid-October, Levi had cleared a space in the shed for her sewing, and she traded 2 jars of preserved pears for a basket of wool scraps with the widow up the road. She sat in the evenings by the fire, piecing them together, not hurried, just steady. Levi often sat nearby, carving handles for the kitchen drawers or patching the hem of his work coat. One evening, the conversation drifted. "Did you have brothers?" he asked. "No, just my father and me. He taught me to ride, to read, and to shoot straight." Said the world didn't care if I was a girl. That why you're so stubborn? No, she said. That's just me. He smiled at that, then leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I never thought I'd fall for someone again. I figured that part of me was buried with her. But then you showed up and I started sleeping through the night. Zadie looked up from her stitching. I never knew the kind of sleep. Not until here. He reached out and took her hand across the space between their chairs. Then let's not waste it. She didn't speak, just rose and went to him, and he stood to meet her. They didn't kiss, not then, but they held each other like they already belonged, the firelight catching the growing quilt at her feet. Outside, the wind settled and the clouds pulled back from the stars. Inside, there was only warmth and the quiet certainty of things taking root. The first snow arrived overnight, soft and silent, blanketing the pasture and the roof with a quiet that pressed against the windows come morning. Levi stoked the stove before dawn, careful not to wake Zadie. The logs hissed in the firebox, and he stood with both hands braced on the mantel, watching the flames catch. He didn't hear her step into the kitchen, but he felt it. She was always light on her feet, like someone used to not being noticed. I heard the wind change, she said, pulling her shawl tight. Thought it might snow. He nodded. Didn't hear it fall. You were asleep. He turned to look at her. I guess I was. Zadie stepped beside him, watching the fire for a long moment. Do you ever think about leaving all this behind? Selling the land, going somewhere different? Levi leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. I used to wonder what it'd be like to live in town. Less writing, more roof over your head. But it never felt like it'd be mine. You think this place is yours now? He shook his head. I think it's ours. Or it could be. She tucked her hands beneath her arms, eyes steady. I've spent most of my life trying to survive someone else's idea of what I should be. But out here, even the quiet feels like it's mine to keep. Levi didn't answer right away. Then he said, I've been thinking about building a root cellar. Spring'll come fast once winter breaks. We'll need a place to store what we grow. You already decided I'd be here come spring? I did. She gave a slow nod. Then I'll help dig it. They spent that afternoon hauling firewood into the lean-to, the snow still thin enough to see the yellowed grass underneath. Zadie tied a scarf over her ears and worked beside him without pause, her breath visible in the cold. When they stopped for water, she leaned against the sled and said, My mother used to sing while we stacked wood. Nothing proper, just little things she made up. Do you remember them? Some. Sing one. She hesitated, then hummed a few bars, low and tuneless. She'd sing about the chickens, the clouds, the way my father's boots sounded on the porch. Nothing anybody would write down. Levi listened, quiet. Still sounds worth remembering. That night, they sat by lamplight, Zadie mending a tear in his coat sleeve, Levi fitting a new latch to the pantry door. The air smelled of wax and pine smoke. Outside, the wind had stilled. You ever wish you'd had a child? She asked, eyes on the needle. He set the latch down. Sometimes. But I wouldn't have wanted to raise one alone. Not without laughter in the house. Zadie didn't look up. I can't say if I'd be any good at it. But I've thought about it. You'd be good, Levi said, voice even. Not because you'd know everything, but because you'd care enough to learn. She tied off her thread and handed him the coat. We might not have long years ahead, not with the way the world goes. But I'd rather spend whatever time we get building something that matters. Levi took the coat and set it aside. Then he reached for her hand across the table. I've got the land. You've got the fire. Between us, I think we've got the makings of a life. Zadie turned her hand in his, fingers lacing through his. Then let's stop waiting for it to start. There was no rush in the way he leaned toward her, nor in the way her eyes softened when he did. They met in the space between lamplight and shadow, their kiss quiet, their breath warm between them. Outside, the snow deepened. Inside, the warmth held. And for the first time in either of their lives, there was no past dragging at their heels, only the slow, steady beginning of something earned. By late November, the days shortened so much that dusk brushed the porch by early afternoon. Snow had deepened in the drifts behind the barn, and the creek behind the north fence had frozen in a narrow silver ribbon. Zadie had taken to warming stones in the stove and wrapping them in cloth to tuck at their feet before bed. Levi, ever watchful, had started bringing in extra firewood before first light and keeping a rifle loaded near the door, not for people but in case the wolves came down from the hills looking for easy stock. One evening after supper, he caught her standing in the doorway of the spare room, her hand on the frame. She didn't notice him at first. "What are you thinking?" he asked, setting down the ledger he'd been adding to by lamplight. She stepped back. "That this room could be more than somewhere to store blankets." He nodded slowly. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "I think I am." They didn't speak more of it that night, but the next morning, Levi hitched the wagon and rode into town. When he returned, he carried a cradle frame wrapped in rough wool cloth and a coil of soft rope. He didn't speak a word as he brought it inside, but Zadie met his gaze, and her fingers brushed the edge of the frame, reverent. That evening, she began sewing a narrow mattress for it, stuffing it with clean straw and feathers from the goose Levi had hunted for Sunday's meal. She didn't speak while she worked, but there was a quiet resolve in the set of her mouth, the kind of stillness that came from decision, not hesitation. Days passed with the rhythm of preparation. Levi cleared the root cellar pit by hand when the ground softened after a warm spell, and Zadie traded a jar of plum preserves for a bolt of muslin from the schoolteacher's sister. Neither of them spoke much about what they were building toward, but the work made it plain. A room was cleared, a cradle was set against the wall, and new shelves were hammered into place for storing linens and dried roots. One afternoon, as Zadie was laying out cloth in the sun to bleach, Levi wiped his hands on a rag and leaned against the doorframe. "You ever think about marrying again?" she asked, not looking up. "I've been thinking about it since the second week you were here," he said. "Just didn't want to ask until you were ready." She turned toward him. "I'm asking now." He stepped out of the doorway, crossed to where she stood, and knelt in the snow-dusted grass. "Then I'm answering yes." She didn't cry, but her breath hitched like something had loosened in her chest. She pulled him to his feet and kissed him once, sure and without ceremony. They were married 3 days later in the parlor of the town's mercantile owner, a quiet man who doubled as justice of the peace. Zadie wore a dress she'd dyed from old muslin with walnut hulls, and Levi shaved for the first time in months. The vows were spoken plainly, the ring's simple bands traded for a pair of wool blankets. No one in the room doubted their sincerity. They held hands the whole way home, the reins loose in Levi's lap, the sky streaked with rose and gold. Winter settled hard after that. Snow piled high against the windows and the wind moaned through the pine rafters. But inside their cabin there was warmth that had nothing to do with fire. They read aloud in the evenings, Levi stumbling through the longer words, Zadie teasing him gently. He carved a small figure of a fox for her one night, unpainted but smooth, and she tucked it onto the mantel beside her mother's cross. In late February, the child came, a daughter born in the hush of early morning, with breath like a whisper and eyes dark as river stone. Zadie named her Mercy. Levi wept when he held her, his hands too large, too careful, like the world might crack if he didn't steady it. "You'll be a good father," Zadie said, her voice raw from the effort of birth. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "Only because you're her mother." Spring came slowly, pulling green from the thawed earth one blade at a time. The chickens began laying again, and the root cellar filled with the first jars of rhubarb and beans. Levi built a swing from the cottonwood behind the barn, and Zadie planted marigolds along the southern wall of the cabin. Mercy's cradle was moved near the hearth, and each evening, they took turns rocking her while the kettle simmered and the fire cracked. They never spoke of the past, not in full. There was no need. It was there, in the way Levi always kept the door bolted at night, and in the way Zadie flinched when thunder rolled too close. But the pain had softened. The sharp edges dulled by time and kindness and the quiet repetition of shared days. By the following autumn, their life had taken on the shape of something whole. They walked the fence line with Mercy wrapped to Zadie's back, her soft coos rising with the wind. Levi taught Zadie how to read a weather shift by the shape of the clouds, and she taught him how to braid straw into baskets tight enough to hold beans through winter. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, casting long gold light across the porch, Levi held Mercy in one arm and reached for Zadie's hand with the other. "You ever think you'd end up here?" he asked. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Not once. But now I can't imagine being anywhere else." He kissed her temple, careful not to jostle the sleeping child between them. "We built it just like we said." Zadie looked out over the pasture, the barn, the line of trees beyond. "And we'll keep building it. Every day." They sat like that until the light faded, the night rising gentle around them like a blanket pulled over tired shoulders. Their hearts, once scattered across too many years and too much hurt, beat now in rhythm not perfect, but steady. Not without cost, but wholly, undeniably theirs. A life shaped by choice, by work, by love that had been earned the honest way, one quiet, steadfast day at a time.